parents, the child goes to the teacher who will guide that child.
What do you mean by external moral authority? You use that expression a lot.
Materialism has to do with when you are
Hello, I bid you a very warm welcome back to the course in Values and Spirituality. In this episode, we will be taking up the subject of environmental values. As you may very well be aware, the subject of the environment has come up a lot in the past decade or so due to discussions and arguments and governments and ordinary people speaking about environmental issues, global warming, etc. So today we're going to look at environmental values, and I will be taking this subject up with the author of these books, who will tell us what environmental values are and how through our attitude and conduct we could show some respect for Mother Nature. Sister Denise, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start off by reading the first sentence in this paragraph, which is contained. You start off by saying environmental values honor the elements of nature and preserve the delicate balance of the ecology. What does it mean to honor the elements of nature?
There is the concept of human beings as the stewards of the earth.
That's a lovely term.
The stewards or the trustees. So the earth is full of bounty, and we have it. We are the masters, the owners of the earth. Most people think and have thought that, well, there's so much water, so much sunshine, so much air, we can do whatever we want and there'll always be more. And it has been like that for centuries. But in 1960, which is 70, 80 years ago, people began to realize that it's finite instead of infinite. Now, we heard, as you said, about global warming, but things have become more complicated, and now we hear about climate change. So the question is, that people ask, who's to blame? And in the environmental debate, it is whether or not it is human beings who have caused this, or whether it would have happened anyway. And it's very, very difficult to answer that question as an either-or situation, because it's a bit hard to say that, well, human beings are responsible for the change of the magnetic orientation of the hemispheres. And that is a big issue, because the southern hemisphere is getting oriented north and the northern hemisphere is getting oriented south, and nobody knows why, and it's increasing to a point where it's getting unstable. You can't really blame humanity for that. So people look for what is the cause. Then there is carbon footprint. You can point to the cause. People are, polluting. Pollution has destroyed the ozone layer. This has created the radiation, and this has altered the jet stream, and so on and so forth. And so humans are to blame. Coral reefs are dying, and the coral is the beginning of the food chain. So is it the humans who have caused this or not? Or whenever the question of values comes up, which is a moral question, out comes that finger, the blaming, the naming, the shaming. You did it, it's your fault, you have to be punished, and then the problem will go away. It's not quite that simple. Things are happening in the sun, huge storms. You can't really point the finger at humanity that you're causing storms in the sun. Cosmic rocks are flying around too close. Well, you can't say that's a human being that's causing this. So sometimes people talk about the natural calamities as acts of God. So if you can't blame humanity, who else is there out there? Must be God. You know, he's supposed to be keeping all this thing in order, and it's his fault, you know. It's raining too hard. So the question of environmental activism comes up. So there's large numbers of people who want to do something to protect Mother Nature. When you use the term Mother Nature, then you have a personification. Why is nature considered feminine or mother? Is because she feeds you. We used to not need to cultivate because you would just go and pick stuff up. As the population increased, you had to start cultivating and animal husbandry and so on. People are getting very frantic because the degeneration of the arable land, salination of farmland, rendering it infertile. A lot of the agricultural land is being destroyed by war. You get huge fires that are going on. The extraction of chemicals, minerals, metals, and so on has created a degeneration of the environment, and people had expected that the environment will restore itself. But now we've got to a point where it's not restoring itself, but there's still more and more and more people, less and less of a piece of cake to eat, and there is like a war going on between humanity and nature. So now, where do values come into this? We might want to look at philosophy of karma.
Having broached that subject, how does the law of karma play out as far as the environment is concerned? What does respect for Mother Nature mean, and how does karma play into this?
Well, there's an expression that people are using: the earth has enough for people's needs, but not for people's greed.
Yes, and we see more evidence of the latter than the former.
Well, let's look at greed. Greed is partly fueled by the glorification of materialism. And a person who restricts themselves and restrains themselves and goes for a simple life is sometimes looked at as a bit of a simpleton. The environmental movement, people are looking at, you know, recycling and using things longer, even the way food production is done. For example, it's very well established that if you have a vegetarian diet, you need much less water, land, etc., by a huge percentage. Simply just taking out the idea that a person needs to eat meat would seriously change the environmental situation, because there is so much of the environment that is destroyed in order to create food to feed the animals. You know, I think 100 times more water is needed to create a pound of beef than it is to create a pound of vegetable protein. The problem is a clash of values between, you can say, corporate values and environmental values, because the big agricultural corporations say, well, we can make money, therefore it's our right. And there is no one to protect the earth from the exploitation of corporations. Because corporations, in many cases, are outside the law because of being multinational. They're not under the limitation of a particular government's laws, or they will apply corruption, bribery, and they will bribe governments, and they will then enjoy freedom to exploit the land, maybe they're also part of the process of displacing villages and so on, and it's a multiplying situation. Just take the oceans. I came to know that the fishing industry has taken so much fish that there are vast areas of the ocean, where there is not a trace of life, where it used to be teeming with fish. And now the fish are small, they're not able to reproduce. It's not that the industries take as much food as is needed, but as much food as can be sold, which is different. The disturbance of the cycle of water, the desertification, the degeneration and poisoning of large amounts of land, the genetic modification of the cereals, all of these things combined has put us into a crisis from which you cannot come out. There will be widespread starvation. There is a gigantic global food crisis. And every time you get a natural calamity, a big storm, storms are getting bigger, more and more frequent. When there are huge storms, it anyway destroys the agricultural land. It's going to put a lot of people into survival. And when people go into survival, the values go out of the window.
What does one stand to do now?
It's a bit difficult to answer that question satisfactorily. On an individual level, make one's life as simple as possible.
Define simplicity for us in practical terms.
I mentioned earlier about vegetarian food. One of the problems of all of this is that the amount of money that you can earn is getting less and less and less. Unemployment is getting more and more. Prepare your own food. You don't have to have so much clothes, so many shoes, so many cars, we're in a culture of excessive things. So if you simplify, that'll be good in some ways, but on the other hand, it affects the system of the economy, which is based on greed. So everything is really out of balance. Now, if you go to the philosophy of karma and say, okay, I'll just look at myself, the individual, and make sure that my karma in terms of my use of material from Mother Nature is not minimum, optimum, and that I'm really curbing my greed. But then I also have to make the self strong to be able to deal with when circumstances absolutely beyond my control, that's nothing to do with my fault, come, and I have to face it. I have to be personally very strong to be able to endure scarcity. One of the things that we have to deal with is lack of electricity. Power generation means using up coal. There's not that much solar energy produced, or if you get a lot of bad weather, then it's not going to do it. So it's really about being able to manage with less.
You say that environmental values include restoring the land to its original surface condition following mining or other industrial exploitation. How is this achievable?
This is something that you have to require of the industries. So in order for a piece of land to be exploited, permissions are required. And those permissions have to be including restoration of the land. And that company has to factor in the price of restoring the surface condition of the land in seeking permission, and that has to be enforced. The problem is corruption. Corruption means you get the permission, you don't have to restore the land. And when you finished mining, then you go somewhere else and the land is destroyed and nobody cares. But the people who are impacted, they suffer enormously. Very often there is toxic chemical spills, maybe impoverished people they're very much damaged by this. They have no recourse. The government doesn't care about them. The corporations don't care. And the media doesn't look at it. And so, too bad, you see. So we live in a culture where if you're successful, if you're wealthy, if you can get away with these behaviors, good. But the philosophy of karma says, taps you on the shoulder and says, wait a minute. You can get away with it for now, but you can't get away with it indefinitely. So sooner or later, there's a beautiful image in Singapore, a statue of a man with an extremely long arm, which goes in a big circle all the way around the earth, and it comes back and taps him on the shoulder, which is a very excellent image of how karma works, you know. And sooner or later, one fine day, whatever it is that you do is going to come back, and you have to pay sooner or later, because the law of karma is inevitable. You cannot escape it. You may be able to escape it for now. The law of karma includes reincarnation. I mean, imagine you have one life exploiting an area for minerals or mining, and your next birth you become one of those babies who's born deformed because of the problems of that industry. That's how it works.
If I want to change my relationship with Mother Nature, if I want to treat the environment with the respect that the environment deserves, how do I go about doing this?
Well, there are so many ways that have been described to an individual, but what's also been said is on an individual level, it doesn't make that much difference.
Yeah, so whether I let the tap run when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning, or whether I close it and open it again when I'm done, does it matter in the broader scheme of things?
Well, it does matter, but you're not going to see the effect of it.
Yes.
You see, so I think definitely everyone who cares about the environment will do whatever is within their power. They will turn off unnecessary lights, they will not let the water run, they will not abuse, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of people who do that. But it's not the individuals who are really the culprits. I would say that the indicators show that it's really a corporate thing. And this is why the activists, they point the finger at the corporations, at the governments, at the climate conferences, and so on. And the response of governments and corporations to these is that, well, if I do this unilaterally, then, other people are going to take advantage of me, so I don't have any incentive to do that, and that's true. I think unless you have a sort of global change of mentality all of a sudden, you're just going to have to face the ultimate consequences, which is that the earth will go into some sort of a meltdown. But I do have another belief.
Oh, do tell us. Do tell us. Before you answer that question, I find that my eyes are drawn to these words that you've also written under environmental values: respect for ecology and the conservation of non-renewable resources. Tell us your belief.
My belief is this, that the earth is indestructible.
Mm-hmm.
And while the earth is looking like in really bad shape, I think that every so often the earth just restores itself. And it may do it in a very cataclysmic manner, so we need to be prepared for that. The earth contains the quantity of air, earth, fire, water, and ether that's a stable quantity. But the way everything has been used in terms of entropy has meant that a lot of it is unusable. It's just in the form of heat that's sitting there. Now, my belief is that things can reach to a particular extreme, an extreme point, like a tipping point, and then when it reaches this extreme, it goes back, as in the J-curve, right to its beginning.
Is this where you think Earth is headed at the moment?
Well, I think it's looking that way. And I think this is why the consciousness of the self as a spirit is important. If you think of yourself, a human spirit in a human body, at the end of your life, you die. After death, what? So from a spiritual angle, we say, well, at the end of my life, I will come back, I'll get another body, and I'll move forward. There can be the death and rebirth of a whole culture. Second World War, 67 million people were killed in a fairly short space of time, but the world's population didn't decline. People, spirits keep, recycling themselves and keep coming back. And I think that a similar principle can apply to the Earth, that it can go through a kind of death and rebirth and come back to its pure, pristine state. I do see that eventually something like this is capable of happening, and that the Earth will regenerate and renew itself. Some studies have been done which said that if you get rid of all the insects, which is what the pesticide companies would really like, then the Earth would be over in 10 years from now, just because of the work the insects do to keep everything going. If you get rid of humanity, in 10 years, the Earth would have restored itself.
Wow.
That's an interesting idea to think about, which says that the behavior of human beings and the quantity of human beings is a problem for the Earth. Now, we can do something about our behavior, but it's a bit difficult to do something about our quantity.
I think we should end there. Is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave the viewer with before we say goodbye?
I think the word, the concept, the value of love. If you love the world, the actions that you will do will be caring, will be non-abusive, non-invasive, non-destructive. And I think that even though one person doing something good doesn't seem to make any difference to anything, yet macrocosm, microcosm. So just the principle that a single individual who understands how everything works, follows the implication of the laws of karma, and does everything very correctly, this can create the impact that brings everything back to its state of balance.
That is a very powerful note on which Sister Denise ended today's talk entitled Environmental Values. I would like to leave you, the viewer, with a few questions. What is your relationship with Mother Nature? Most of us fall into the category of taking Mother Nature and Earth for granted, assuming that she is simply there to serve us and not sparing a thought as to how Mother Nature will renew her seemingly unlimited resources. But I'm of the view that we can all do our bit to preserve this wonderful world that we call home. So spare thought for environmental values. I hope to see you again for the next episode, in which we will also be discussing the various types of values with our guest speaker, Sister Denise. Thank you for joining us today. So thank you for joining us as well, and I'll see you in a bit. Goodbye.